Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving us your attention this evening, whether you're here with us in the hall or whether you're watching online. We thank you for taking time out of your busy days and lives to consider the message of the Bible. For most of us, the evidence for a dying planet is not really right on our individual doorsteps. Well, that's at least the way it seems to be for me. We hear a lot about natural disasters. There's the cyclone, which the rain that we're currently getting is an aftermath of. And there's things such as the volcanic eruption off of the coast of Tonga, which created tsunamis. We hear about those things in the news, and we might even see some news pictures of larger than normal waves on the east coast of Australia. But there's not a lot which is happening directly to us individually. In fact, in a recent holiday that we took with our family over to the Eyre Peninsula, we saw some beautiful scenery, nice and clean, green. We had dolphins playing around our boat. Even the memory of the 2020 bushfires, which affected my father-in-law's farm, are starting to fade a bit. Because when you go back there, it's like there's never been a bushfire except for the odd scar here and there. But it's when we broaden our horizons and look more broadly at the earth that we begin to see some things which are a little more scary. In October and November of 2021, if it was possible to sort of push aside the news of COVID and everything that was going on, you might have heard of COP26, which is being held in Glasgow. This is the latest instalment in the global or climate change and state of the planet conference, which is held on a relatively regular basis. This 26th instalment was held in Glasgow, and there's been obviously a number of them over the past 30 years. It's the UN's climate conference where the world is grappling with the effects that are starting to show themselves. As you'll see on the screen there, just a bit of a timeline. COP stands for the Conference of Parties. It's the highest decision-making body of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. As we said before, there's been 26 of those meetings. And you can see that over the years, from 1990, these conferences have been held quite regularly. You'll probably notice and recognise some of those names. The Kyoto Protocol is something that you probably have heard of, and the Paris Climate Agreement came to notoriety, particularly when Donald Trump and the United States withdrew from that agreement. As we said at the end of last year, then we had the COP26 conference in Glasgow. Alongside of those conferences is a group called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. You've probably heard that term as well. They provide regular reports and sometimes special reports as required. And in 2015, they published a special report which listed 5 reasons for concern. This is 5 reasons why we should be concerned about the state of the planet. The first one of those was unique and threatened systems, and these are systems, both ecological and human, which are under threat, and they include things such as coral reefs, the Arctic, indigenous people of the Arctic, mountain glaciers, and other biodiversity hotspots. Other reasons for concern include extreme weather events, and that would also include things such as heat waves, which we are somewhat familiar with in this city. Heavy rain, we're getting a bit of that at the moment, and certainly up in the north of Australia, they're seeing more rain than they have for quite some time. And droughts and wildfires and also coastal floodings. Thirdly, It's the distribution of those impacts which should concern us, because they impact on the global monetary systems, which then have impacts on the degradation and loss of ecosystems and other biodiversity. Sorry, that wasn't the distribution of impacts. That was how it's disproportionately impacting particular groups. The effects of climate change are not being felt evenly across the globe. The impact on monetary systems, as I mentioned, and lastly, large-scale events, which are abrupt and sometimes cause irreversible change. And the sorts of things that would relate to is the disintegration of the Greenland and Antarctic ice sheets. In 2021, the IPCC further delivered a report on the impact that would occur, or the differences in impact between an increase in temperature of 1.5 degrees versus 2 degrees. And they found that it could, by keeping it to 1.5 degrees, we could reduce the number of people exposed to climate-related risks and susceptible to poverty by up to several hundred million people by 2050. That means that there's hundreds of millions of people that would be able to avoid things such as flooding, scarcity of food, superstorms, deadly heat, and widespread disease. For every fraction that the planet warms above 1.5 degrees, then the impacts are more and more severe. And if it was to go over 2 degrees, then we would see the loss of much and the increase of the natural disasters and things that we might find on the planet. So it turns out that for every half of degree of warming, then it matters quite a bit. And so you can imagine, can't you, that as the world is hearing these reports, then there is a significant amount of anxiety that starts to grow and impacts that come from that. There's a number of websites that you can go to and find information about the sorts of things that are happening. So there was a report that was titled "Accelerated Modern Human-Induced Species Loss." And they said that if the currently elevated extinction pace is allowed to continue, humans will soon, in as little as 3 human lifetimes, be deprived of many biodiversity benefits. On human timescales, this loss would be effectively permanent. We're soaring off the limb we're sitting on. Without finding some way to reverse use of the world's resources at the rate that it's currently being used, then humanity could be living on a planet stripped of much of its biodiversity. And that's not even considering the potential devastating effects of global climate change, which has only recently started to really kick into gear. Humanity, hold on, it's going to be a bumpy ride, says one author. In another article published in 2021 in the Frontiers of Conservation Science, it says that humanity is barrelling toward a ghastly future of mass extinctions, health crises, and constant climate-induced disruption to society. One that can only be prevented if world leaders start taking environmental threats seriously. It goes on to describe 3 crises in particular that are facing the Earth: climate disruption, biodiversity, and human overconsumption and overpopulation. And they cite a whole range of studies which point in the direction of the fact that the Earth is being put in a more precarious position than most people realise, and could even jeopardise, they say, the human race. What will that future look like, they say? Well, for starters, since the start of agriculture, Earth has lost an estimated 50% of its terrestrial plants and roughly 20% of animal biodiversity. If current trends continue, it may be as many as 1 million of Earth's 7 to 10 million plant and animal species would face extinction in the near future. These disasters, they say, coupled with climate-induced droughts and sea level rises, could mean that 1 billion people become refugees by the year 2050, forcing mass migrations and further disrupting society. There's plenty more that can be said about that, but suffice it to say that you don't need to look too far or read too many reports to understand that the planet that we're living on has some real struggles ahead of it. And if man was to continue his stewardship of that, then the extinction events and disruptions that they speak of, I think we would all agree, are likely to be inevitable. The Bible has quite a lot to say about this planet. The record of the creation of life is the foundation, of course, of everything that follows. So the Bible has quite a bit to say about the earth and its future, and that's really where we want to bring our conversation to for the rest of our time this evening. Because what we want to have a look at is, what is it that the Bible says is in the earth's future? And we'll see, hopefully, how different that is from the reports that we can read from scientists around the world. Let's take a look. Come with me, if you've got a Bible with you, turn to the prophet Isaiah. We'll start in Isaiah 35. As we read these verses, I just want you to notice the difference to those reports that I was reading out to you previously. Isaiah 35, verses 1 and 2. I've got that on the screen there as well, in case you don't have a Bible. We read there, "The wilderness and the solitary place shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice even with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the excellency of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God." So there's a bit of a contrast there, isn't there? We all know what wildernesses are, and you don't have to travel too far in this country to get yourself into a wilderness. There's not much there. And here we're told that those wildernesses and those solitary places are actually going to blossom. The desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. And we all know how beautiful a garden of roses can look. They're not all that fun to take care of, but they look really nice when you do take care of them. And what we're told is that the desert places of the earth, of which there is a significant portion of the earth that is desert, are going to blossom. So that's a pretty significant change, isn't it? And you don't need to look too far to see what happens when a bit of water arrives in a desert. Many of you would have seen the photos even in the far north of Australia. When the rain returns, then life and fauna and flora just seem to come out of nothing. It's there, it just takes a little bit of help. And so we can see there then that we're told that the earth is going to change. There is going to be a difference. There's going to be a change to its current outlook. Let's come down to a few more verses. And we'll talk about verses 5 and 6. It says, "The eyes of the blind shall be open, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap as an hart, and the tongue of the dumb sing, for in the wilderness shall waters break out and streams in the desert." So again, we have reinforced for us that idea that the deserts are going to change, that there's going to be differences in the beauty of the earth. But there's also that other part there which we need to take note of as well, because of course when people start talking about the impact of climate and the death of the planet and the changes in biodiversity, then they're talking also about the impact on people. and the negative impacts that can have on them. And that can come in many, many shapes and forms. But in just one there, we're told that those who might be lame will walk, those that are unable to speak will sing, the deaf will hear, and the blind will also see. So all of those problems that are extant on the earth today will have a reversal, and that will come at a time in the future. Let's come across to the prophet Micah. It's a minor prophet towards the end of the Old Testament. And in Micah 4 and verse 4, we read this: "But they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts hath spoken it." Now again, this tells us a couple of things about this planet. Obviously, there's a safety aspect there where there's no fear, that people have their own land and are able to sustain themselves. Now, today's world is marked by large urbanisation of people, millions and millions of people gathered in a very small area. As we've seen in those other passages in Isaiah, then we can see that arid places, or places which can't currently sustain populations of people, will be capable of sustaining populations of people. Now, just to take a little look at a small population centre, let's look at South Australia. So South Australia has a population of 1.5 million people. 1.1 million of those are gathered in the Greater Adelaide area, and the other 400,000 are scattered in smaller population centres throughout the rest of the state. The land area of South Australia is 984,321 kilometres squared. So if you were to divide those up and sort of work that out, it comes out at around about 0.65 kilometres squared per person, which, to give you some idea, that's about 650,000 metres squared, or 6 large house blocks and a bit left over for each and every person in this state, if the land of this state was capable of supporting that. Currently it's not. And what we're being told here is that the earth is going to change in such a way that it will be able to easily support the population of the earth. 650 square metres of space per person, that's no small space to work with, is it? And if the land is able to bring forth food more abundantly, which we'll see that in a little bit later, then you can easily see, can't you, that the earth under those circumstances would be able to support the population of the earth far better than it can now. Let's come back to Isaiah 65. Is a passage which talks about the impact of these changes on the longevity of mankind. Verse 20 of Isaiah 65, we read, There shall be no more thence an infant of days, nor an old man that hath not filled his days, for the child shall die 100 years old, but the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. So there's an indication there that the time is coming when our current life expectancy is going to grow markedly. Because an infant will be considered, or one that dies 100 years old would be considered but a child. So again, we're told that the earth and the changes around it are going to be significant. We mentioned previously about the earth being more abundant in food. Come across to the prophet Amos. And Amos 9 and at verse 13, we're told here of a time that, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that the ploughman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him that soweth seed, and the mountains shall drop sweet wine, and all the hills shall melt. That indicates to us, doesn't it, that there is a significant increase in food produce, and so can easily take away the hunger that is currently on the earth, and the impact that we're seeing from some of these climate-induced events that are taking away the food productivity of the earth and making it harder for man to grow enough food to feed him. So there's a significant change and a significant difference to the earth and the way that it produces food. And that will be available to all the inhabitants of the earth. Come across to the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 7. And reading from verse 16 and 17, they shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more, neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, and shall lead them unto living fountains of water, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. So hunger, thirst, heat will be taken away. There'll be no strength in the heat, perhaps, that could refer to. But thirst and hunger, wiping away tears, there's no more hurt, no more pain. That's the future that the earth is having in front of it. And so you can see, can't you, that when you compare those passages with the passages from the articles and the reports that are currently looking at the planet and its state, show a very, very different idea. So why that difference? Why such a difference between what the Bible presents and what the scientists of this world are presenting? Well, as we said right back at the very beginning, that the God of the Bible shows in his word his plan for this earth. He created it. He put everything in its place. He created all the fauna and the flora. He made it work together, and he created those ecosystems that are now being destroyed. But you see, more than that, he had a purpose before he even started doing that. This wasn't just some crazy experiment where God said, let's set up this creation and we'll see what happens with it. Let's come back again to the prophet Isaiah and at chapter 45. In verse 18 of Isaiah 45, we read this: For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it, he hath established it, he created it not in vain, he formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. So there's quite a lot that we're told just in that one simple verse, isn't it? Let's just work through some of those. Well, first of all, and again this is a topic for another night, we're told that it's God who created the earth and that there is no one else beside him. So he is the only and the all-powerful. He created the heavens and the earth, he formed them, he put their structures in place, he put the laws in place that currently govern not just this earth but the entire universe, and he didn't do it just on a whim. It wasn't done in vain. he had a purpose, and the purpose was that it was to be inhabited. It was going to be inhabited by people. Let's come back to Genesis 2. Genesis 2 is the story after the creation was completed, and it tells us a few things about how it is that God set things up. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but I just want to have a look at verse 15. It says there, "And the Lord God took man, put him into the Garden of Eden," and here's the purpose: to dress it and to keep it. So it wasn't that Adam and Eve, when they were put into that garden, were just wandering around. They had a job to do. It was to dress it and to keep it. And the word dress in the Hebrew has the idea behind it of serving. So they were there to serve the garden, to be a servant to it. And the word keep means to guard, to guard it. So they had a task to do. They were to be the guardians of the earth. It was their job, it was their obligation to serve the earth and to keep it. So when we look at that ourselves, we have that similar obligation, don't we? We do have an obligation to serve and to guard the planet. Now, the human race is not doing a very good job of that at the moment. And that can be daunting for each one of us, can't it? So what can we do? The scientists and the activists are demanding government action, but that's tough. Trying to get 195 plus nations of the earth, all with their own self-interests, to work together, well, we can see the outcome of things like COP26 and understand that it's not working. The action that people are taking is too slow, or it's not strong enough. Commitments are given, but even if they are given by one leader, well, they can be withdrawn by another leader. The activists are crying too little, too late. But wouldn't it be fantastic if there was one leader who could compel action from everybody else, who could bring everyone together and govern them with one law? Let's come across again to Micah 4. In Micah 4, verse 1 and 2, "But in the last days it shall come to pass that the mountain of the Lord, the house of the Lord, shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and the people shall flow to it. And many nations shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, and to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law shall go forth of Zion, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." So there we have a prophecy of a time when God himself will establish a kingdom. He will establish a government in Jerusalem, and that all nations will look to it as leadership, for leadership. They will show that they will go to this place, and they will receive instruction from a single king. Come across to Psalm 72. We'll find out a little bit more about this king and what he will be like. I'm not going to go through all of Psalm 72, but just to pick out a few verses there. Verse 2, so this judge, this king, "He shall judge thy people with righteousness, and thy poor with judgment." Drop down to verse 4. "He shall judge the poor of the earth. He shall save the children of the needy, and shall break in pieces the oppressor. In verse 12 and verse 13. For he shall deliver the needy when he crieth, the poor also, and him that hath no helper. He shall spare the poor and the needy, and shall save the souls of the needy. That's an indicator of what this king is going to be like. He's going to look out for the people that are struggling at the moment. So those nations, low-lying Pacific nations who went to COP26 and were saying, come on, you guys, you've got to help us because otherwise the rising sea levels are going to take away our islands. Well, whether the nations of the earth can or will do anything about it, time will tell. But here we're told that if there's someone poor and someone needy, someone who's being oppressed, then coming to this king, they're going to get a good hearing and he will put forth righteous judgments. Let's come back to Isaiah 11. We read more about this king. In Isaiah 11 and verses 3 to 5, we'll go from verse 1. And there shall come forth a rod out of the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, and the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. And shall make him of quick understanding in the fear of the Lord. And he shall not judge after the sight of his eyes, neither reprove after the hearing of his ears. But with righteousness shall he judge the poor, and reprove with equity for the meek of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips shall he slay the wicked. And righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. This is a very different world leader to those whom we see around us at the moment. So what we're promised in the Bible then is a leader that will govern the earth and who is capable of guiding the earth to restoration. And he has the power of God in heaven with which to do that work. So will the earth survive? Well, the Bible's answer is yes. We've seen how that God will establish his kingdom. He will supply a leader. He's offering long life. He's offering relief. He's offering to renew the earth and make it productive again. All of these things are in the future of the earth. So if you've been anxious about the survival of this planet, then the Bible can put your mind at ease. We've concentrated a fair bit on the future of the planet tonight, but the Bible also shows that things are likely to get worse before they get better. We're not going to go into that tonight. But to give ourselves an opportunity to see that future, God does require something from us. So let's come across to the Gospel of Mark. Mark chapter 16. And the context of this is Jesus at the end of his first advent, his time here on earth, just after he was resurrected. And he's giving instructions to his disciples to what they're to do after he leaves. So in verse 15, he says unto them, "Go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." And that's what we're doing here tonight. "He that believeth," says Jesus, "and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned," or condemned. So there's a choice for all of us to make. We can be anxious about the earth and see what might happen, or we can believe that the God who created the earth will not let that earth come to too much harm, that there will come a time when he will step in and that he will turn the the death throes of the planet that we're seeing, and he will turn them back to life. But he wants us to take a step ourselves, to do something about that, to put our life in his hands and to trust in him. So our message to you tonight then is that we would invite you to explore the Bible's message and to take steps that will enable you to be a part of the offer that God makes to all humans. Thank you.